Ladies and gents, welcome to Suju Reaction, and this is History Summarized, the Maya, Aztec, and Inca by the channel Only Sarcastic Productions. Human sacrifice, yeah, that's just the fucking. They used to, sacrifice people and play football with their heads or something like that. That's just weird. Smallpox and the Spanish Empire, that's the whole story, right? Haha. What? Not even close. The civilization of Mesoamerica are fascinating in their own right and very distinct from each other too. Step on in and I'll learn you a thing or two. Yeah, this is the first video I'm reacting from Blue, the history guy from this channel. It's gonna be fun. I love history. That's how I started this channel, by reacting to history videos. Obviously, I haven't reacted to history videos in a long time now. I think I should start doing that again. Yeah, so Maya, Aztec, and Inca. Yeah, Maya, I think, it's that, Mayan calendar and shit. That was, Maya become more famous because of that. In 2012, it was a big thing. I mean, people who don't, really think about history and things, I mean, they kind of have heard about Maya, Aztec, Inca, but now they know more about Maya because that was a big thing. Mayan calendar is running out. Mayan calendar is running out. It's just effed up. I think Mayan or people or Aztec, I don't know who they were, but there are people who basically did all this ceremony where they sacrificed people, I think, and then played football with their heads or something, or I don't know, something like that, playing football with people's head. There was something like that. I mean, imagine that. Just imagine that is happening in front of you. They literally chop off people's head and playing football. How fucked up that is. How inhumane and barbaric that is, that you can't even process that. I mean, anybody, doesn't matter how, however, strong you might think you are, that would be so terrifying to see. So they did that as a ceremony. I always think that, like, how did people do that? Were people used to be really, I guess, mentally tough or something, that they didn't care, or they were just a-holes? Then I'll start to realize, it's probably religion. Religion blinds people of lots of things. So basically, they're people like, yeah, this is what the gods want. These people will basically die and go to the heaven or something like that, whatever they believed in. So they did that in the name of God or something. Religion blinds people with atrocities, I guess. I don't know much about Maya, Aztec, and Inca. This is just some things I heard. But it's gonna fun to react to because this is literally new area of history that I've never heard about. I never reacted to any video that include Maya, Aztec, Inca, or any America's native, old ancient tribes or something. So this is gonna be a fun video. I reacted to a few already sarcastic production videos already, mostly myth and red videos. But yeah, if you haven't seen them, check out the cast. There's a playlist uploaded for it. Only sarcastic production reaction, something like that. Internet historian reaction, then salmonella reaction, tier zoo, real life lore, things like that. Cause that, and yeah, let's watch this one.
Alrighty, let's cover the great civilizations of the New World, from the time before the Old World made the New World new by killing most of the New World and reconstructing it to be way more Old Worldy. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Anyway, 3 great civilizations: the Inca, the Aztec, and the Maya. The Maya, the Inca, and the Aztec? Okay. Aztec, Maya, Inca? Hey, nice. Okay.
So basically, the way Fox News would put it, the Mexican civilizations, apparently.
Next problem. What's the difference between them? Because before I started researching this video, I honestly couldn't tell you either, because so often their stories are only told insofar as they relate to the Spanish conquest of the Americas. So we hear a lot about human sacrifices and smallpox, but not so much anything else, and they all kind of blend together. But these societies were highly complex and had their own histories long before the conquistadors showed up, and they were also completely unique and distinct from each other. The Maya have been around on the Yucatan Peninsula for basically ever, and were subsistence farmers for almost the whole time. But their great cities mostly disappeared before the Spanish ever arrived. The Aztec Empire was born from a triple alliance of city-states in central Mexico, and they built up an amazing capital city in Tenochtitlan. Unlike the Maya, the Aztecs only lasted for about 100 years before the Spanish wiped them out. And finally, the Inca were from South America, not Mexico, and they lived almost entirely in the western coastal mountains for over a century before the Spanish showed up. So we're dealing with a decent amount of variety here, and it's part of what makes it really cool. So before we jump into this, we should also take a look at what sources we're working with. Archaeology in most cases—
I'm not gonna lie, that city that was on the mountain, that would be a so cool location, right? You wake up, you basically go outside and you see all the hills and everything. It's just, you're on top of the mountain, literally.
is pretty good, but in this specific instance, we're also lucky enough to have decent written accounts. The Maya and the Aztecs both had pictographic writing, although it took us a good long while before we could actually translate any of it. First, we figured out numbers in the Mayan calendar, and then in the mid and late 1900s we were able to translate more of the Maya script and discovered that their writing system was syllabic rather than alphabetic. And lucky for us, it turns out that a lot of the texts contain dynastic records, so the Maya actually recorded their own history, which is really cool. The reason we still have a lot of Mayan writing is because a lot of it was written on surfaces like temple walls, ceramics, and the occasional staircase.
Yeah, I feel like there's a reason behind this, I think, because whenever you write down something, you write down history, you want it to, I guess, live for a long time. You don't want it to get lost or destroyed. Just, I guess putting inscription on the staircases kind of solidifies that, because staircases is like, staircases have their long use. So staircase is always going to be there. So I guess the writings will survive too. Some kind of mentality there, who the hell knows.
The Aztec writing system is a trickier topic though, since the Aztecs weren't quite around for long enough to create a fully fleshed out writing system. From the surviving codices we have, we know that they certainly liked writing, but I say surviving because Spanish Christians burned almost all of their texts before incidentally also murdering almost everybody. Which, by the way, anyone in any situation who decides that burning information is a good idea is just being a dick. There's no two ways about that. Luckily, we still—
Yeah, that is so fucking true, isn't it? Even though there's a political reason about religion, because they don't want different type of culture and their religion to be adopted by the your own people who goes there. So they arrived there, they saw there are different people, and basically they got threatened that Christianity might get challenged, so they basically burned all the things that could have challenged that. So they killed the people, they killed all the books. But yeah, destroying knowledge is one of the most worst thing you can do at the long span of times like this. And there are lots of knowledge in the past that's been lost. One of the videos we saw about, I think Pythagoras, I don't know who the scientist was, but his writings was basically written off so somebody could write something else. I think it was a art thing or religion thing. I don't know. I think it was a religion thing. Some monk basically, destroyed the writing. So this is effed up. We know there are lots of times where kings ordered books to be burned, entire libraries of books to be burned. So this is just effed up, man. God knows how much knowledge we lost so far.
Still know a decent amount about the Aztecs on account of Spanish writings about them. Meanwhile, the Inca themselves didn't actually have a writing system. They instead had this really cool thing called a quipu, a collection of knotted cords of different lengths and colors used to record and convey information.
What?
Quipus contained all sorts of numerical information, like dates and events and whatnot, but we still mostly can't decipher them, so it's a mystery. Our other information—
How do you know if it's a dates and things if you can't even decipher them? I mean, that is weird, the way they chose to use threads for that.
on the Inca comes, again, mostly from the Spanish. So are the Spanish accounts of these civilizations biased and or more likely to portray things in a more negative or exoticized light? Probably in some cases, yeah, but they're the best we have, so they'll have to do. Now that we've got that sorted, let's go one by one and look at some proper history. The Aztec and the Inca are actually relative latecomers to the party, as they really only came along in the centuries immediately prior to the Spanish arrival. Those two are contemporaneous with the Renaissance. So it is super inaccurate to label those two as way ancient like we subconsciously tends to do. The Maya, however, are crazy ancient, but not quite as crazy ancient as the Olmec civilization, the first fancy civilization in all of Mesoamerica, which flourished for 2,000 years between 1500 BC and about 400 AD. Now that
just like
is
the
old.
Greeks.
While we have a fair amount of Olmec art and statuary thanks to our old pal archaeology, they're still decently mysterious, which makes sense given how old they are. Slightly less old than the Olmecs is the central Mexican city of Teotihuacan, which is similarly shrouded in mystery and uniquely cool for how huge and well designed it was. Its most famous building, the Pyramid of the Sun, was built in the 1st century AD, but aside from the building remains in the city, we really don't know a lot about it, like who built it or who lived there. The presence of some shattered statues points to evidence of some variety of popular uprising near the end of the city's life, but still, not a lot to go on. Also, it might have been a trade empire? Again, we don't really know, but it's big, it's old, it's cool, and it was probably the inspiration for most of the subsequent Mesoamerican culture as we understand it.
Yeah, if it looked like that, that's just ridiculous. Look at that. Basically city like that. with, massive structures around it. I don't know. Feel like this is way too crowded when it comes to the old cities and things. I think we exaggerate how crowded and how much buildings would there have been. So I don't know.
And it now, so it's worth a mention. Anyway, back to the Maya. Agriculture in the Yucatan Peninsula developed in the 2nd millennium BC, and by about 500 BC they had huge and awesome cities. In the centuries following 250 AD, the Maya were out in full force, building giant monuments covered in writing, connecting cities with trade, and just generally being an awesome civilization. This is impressive because it's just kinda cool, but also because it was...
Well, we all know that none of them were fat. I mean, look at that stare. The stare, basically, just seeing that makes your metabolism rise up and you start to lose fat before you even start to climb it. Look at that.
Really hard to live in the Yucatan Peninsula. It's an exposed coral reef that's basically impossible to farm conventionally, so they had to practice slash and burn agriculture, where they slash down vegetation and then burn it to infuse the soil with enough nutrients to sustain crops for a few years before moving on to another plot of land and letting the old forest regrow. Adding to the trickiness, rivers don't really form in limestone, so the only naturally available sources of water were sinkholes, called cenotes. So a lot of really intricate hydraulic engineering went into making the Yucatan livable. And if that all sounds labor-intensive, it's because it is. It's a minor miracle that the Maya were able to build the kinds of settlements they did with such inhospitable land. So while the Maya spent the centuries between 250 and 900 AD trying not to die of hunger and thirst on a regular basis, they were practicing their religion, which is really interesting in how
Yeah, okay. So Mayas are barely surviving. And apparently there are people who takes, Mayan calendar so seriously. Like, obviously Mayans knew more than we do now. Obviously they were so damn advanced. Mayan calendar ended, so that must be the end of the world in 2012. That was the mentality behind it. I'm like, come on, man.
heavily cyclical it is. They believe that the world went through cycles of creation and destruction, and most of their deities have some hand in the cyclicality of the universe. The Maya also thought that no beginning or end was definite, and that when someone died, they went on a journey through the underworld and the heavens before showing back up on Earth, which may serve to explain why they were so chill with sacrifice. The sacrificing was also predominantly a priestly measure to delay the rebirth of the world and the collapse of the world as they knew it.
Fucking religion, I hate this. I mean, usually, people talk about that they sacrifice virgins and shit. So that just means basically they sacrifice teenagers and kids. I mean, they're virgins, otherwise how would you, So basically they kill kids because they thought, they are going to go through underworld and get reborn again. Why? Because that's what their religion is. Somebody just said that shit and people believe it. And they were just fine by literally snuffing out life that just barely begin yet. Kids are kids, man. This is just after when I really think about it, like teenagers basically getting killed. What the fuck? Sacrifice my ass.
But while their mythology may have thought that nothing has an end, history had other plans for the Maya. A series of droughts contributed to a gradual decline of Maya culture in the southern Yucatan Peninsula. Cities were mostly abandoned due to a likely mix of too many people and too little water. In the centuries after, the Maya gravitated towards the northern Yucatan, where water was more consistently available. Cities like Chichen Itza and Mayapan became the dominant urban centers in the later centuries. Even still, those cities also gave way in the 12th and 15th centuries respectively, so by the time the Spanish showed up in the 16th century, there wasn't much left to conquer. So that's the Maya for you. Real slow burn on that one. The Aztec to the northwest had a much faster history. In the 12th and 13th centuries, a series of independent city-states began
These stairs are just ridiculous, man.
In the 12th and 13th century.
Look at the stairs that just go straight up steep like that. Or they couldn't build it like zigzag style. I mean, this is ridiculous. How many people died by just mistakenly falling down the stairs?
Centuries, a series of independent city-states began cropping up around the Texcoco Lake Valley in what is today central Mexico. One such group of people, the Mexica as they called themselves, settled into an island in the middle of the lake and founded the city of Tenochtitlan in 1325. The city and the culture developed and spread over the next century as trade increased and cultural and religious influence grew. In 1428, the Mexica formed an alliance with two other nearby peoples, and the newfangled Aztec Empire began to expand their territory and conquer their neighbors. This wasn't terribly bothersome for them because their warriors were really skilled. Not only did they conscript all adult males for fighting, but they used warriors from allies and conquered territories too. Plus, their elite jaguar and eagle warriors were especially fearsome. In the course of conquering a majority of southern Mexico, Tenochtitlan, the capital, became only more and more splendid. Much like Venice, the city was an island and it was dotted with canals in addition to its huge temples. It's been estimated to have been several times as big as contemporary London, approximately the size of late medieval Paris. Yeah, that's big. And I mean, look at it. That is one pretty city. The Aztec also played a game that the Maya were known for, called Pocahontas. The game apparently involved getting a rubber ball into a high hoop without the use of hands or feet. The game was highly ritualized and meant a lot to the people who watched and played it. The end of the game involved some variety of sacrifice, but we're not quite sure who it would have been or for what purpose. Unlike the gradual decline of
For what purpose? To please the gods. By now you should know that.
Maya cities, the Aztecs lasted right up until the Spanish arrived. And since the Aztecs, unlike the Maya, were an empire, that meant that the Aztecs ruled over a lot of people who thought that they were massive knobs. So when Spain showed up and decided to take everything the Aztecs owned, and also their lives, they stoked rebellions among the Aztecs' often annoyed subjects. Uprisings plus smallpox plus guns made for a fairly quick imperial turnover. But while blood was flying everywhere in Mexico, there was an interesting debate going
Europeans were great at that wherever they went. Conquer and divide and conquer basically.
on in Spain. See, while genocide definitely happens during the New World's conquest, some people were debating its merits and whether or not it was justified. A guy named Sepulveda argued that the Aztecs were bad because of how much sacrifice they did, and Spain had the moral authority to kill them in retribution. But a guy named De las Casas argued that the Aztecs were their own people with their own ways, and it wasn't for Spain to step in and decide what was right and
Alright, first of all, yes, that's very shitty thing like I've said before. Sacrificing virgins or basically kids because they're of the stupid their religion views. Because they think people don't really die, they would just go through underworld and shit like that. That is just effed up. If I see that happening, I'll lose my mind. Basically kill one or two people just by my bare hands if I witness that. So that's really effed up. Alright? But, just saying that justifies we murdering all of them is kind of weird. I mean, they're murdering assholes, so we're gonna murder them because that's justified. No. Also saying that, it's just their culture. That's effed up too. I mean, there should be a middle ground somewhere there.
Wrong. It's really neat to see what types of arguments each side was providing, as it gives us an interesting insight into the Spanish colonial mindset. The conquistadors are rightly given a lot of flack for all of their conquisting and genociding, but we should recognize that the morality of genocide was at least on their minds. It's a start, right?
Yeah,
with Mexico
there should be
covered,
middle
let's
ground.
jump south and talk about the Inca. The Inca Empire began with the once small kingdom of Cusco in the mountains of Peru, and it started expanding in 1438 to ultimately cover much of South America's west coast. Seriously, this thing was huge. It might have even been the world's biggest empire at the time. Even more impressive, it was multi-ethnic, and it incorporated people through diplomacy as well as outright conquest. The Inca government was very specifically formulated and highly efficient, but the Inca, like we said, had no writing. So, well done. If having no writing was tricky, imagine what it was like building huge stone cities on the tops of mountains.
Look at that shit. What is the Machu Picchu? I think it's the most famous one. Yeah, look at that. There are still cities on the top of the mountain surviving. Look at the cliffs and that. This is literally top of the mountain. Living there would be so ridiculous. Just getting out and seeing all that. You're literally living on top of mountain.
With no wheels. Yeah, the Inca hauled everything up those mountains with llamas and people. If mountainous cities weren't crazy enough on their own, the Inca also had a network of hundreds of suspension bridges made only from woven fibers that ran all across the mountains. Their fiber working was so refined that they could even make seaworthy boats out of it. The Inca infrastructure, which is amazingly well adapted to the mountain-covered coast, is almost entirely a result of their excellent central government. Terrace farming was also a huge factor in the ability of the Inca to live in such mountainy terrain. Also, in the middle of all this, they figured out how to freeze-dry food, and were also performing consistently successful brain surgery. So there's that. Much like with the Aztecs, the Spanish showed up in the 1500s with intents to wreck shop and colonize
Successful brain surgeries? What are you talking about? Really?
everything. And they did. An Incan civil war and the outbreak of smallpox immediately prior to the Spanish arrival certainly made conquering easier for them. In the centuries after, Spain would import tons upon tons of gold and silver from the New World and absolutely destroy their
Yeah, the CGP Grace videos, America Pox basically told us that, like, Europeans basically gave Americans, at the times of like Aztec, Incans, whatever, and all the natives of that, all the diseases. But that wasn't, vice versa. I mean, the Europeans didn't get it. So basically, it was easier for Europeans, because it's not that Europeans wouldn't have conquered them. Of course, they would have. Europeans were much advanced. But it was basically simple slaughter, and most of them died by diseases, like the CGP Grace says in the video. Most of them just died by diseases. They were not slaughtered. Most of them just died by diseases. So we don't hear about these bloody wars that fought into the Americas. It's just the European went there and killed everybody. We always hear that. So obviously, most of them died by just diseases. That's something.
economy with inflation, sending them on a lovely one-way ride to geopolitical irrelevance within a century. I'm not saying karma, but it kinda seems like karma, don't you think? Anyway, that's Mesoamerica for you. Maya, Aztec, and Inca. Hey, there we go!
Yeah. So Mayans are the older of the three, I guess. And the Inca one, the Peru one, that is just ridiculous when I see that. I've seen the Machu Picchu, I think that's the name, the famous city on the mountain or something. You could see that from the different mountain, it just looks incredible. And there were lots of cities like that on the complete top of the mountain. I mean, maybe their mentality was, how in old ancient time, there were mentality like people built, I guess, fortresses in top of mountains and things like that. So you could see the enemy coming or something. So that was their mentality. Like if you build cities on top of mountains, nobody can basically sneak up onto us and, basically kill all of us. We could see people coming from the distance. We might have advantage or something like that. So yeah. Well, people, that was the Maya, Aztec, and Inca history summarized by the only Sarcastic production. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction today. There's a link in the description. Check out the cast of the playlist, like only Sarcastic production, internet history, and things like that. And if you want me to react to some video, or even from this channel, specific video, comment down, I guess. And I'll see you next time.